The morning sun slanted through the tall, narrow windows of the Franklin County Courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished oak floors. The building hummed with the low murmur of people arriving, lawyers clutching briefcases, parents holding their children's hands tightly, and officers stationed at every corner, their boots echoing sharply in the otherwise hushed hallways. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, mingled with the sterile tang of cleaning supplies. Outside, traffic hummed along Main Street, but inside, the world felt different, heavier somehow, as if every heartbeat had to tiptoe around the solemnity of justice. Officer Mark Daniels stood near the entrance to Courtroom 3B, his posture straight, boots polished to a mirror shine. At his side sat Rex, his German Shepherd partner, alert and perfectly still. Rex's ears twitched at every subtle sound, the shuffle of a paper, the click of heels against the marble floor, the soft whimper of a child somewhere down the hall. He was calm, but beneath that calm rested a reservoir of energy and awareness honed through years of training. Rex's gaze swept the room habitually, scanning for any signs of unease. Today, however, something, or someone, seemed to catch his attention almost instantly. In the front row of the courtroom sat Lily, a tiny 3-year-old with wide, innocent eyes that seemed far older than her years. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers wrapped around the leather strap of her mother's purse. Lily had been coaxed into this formal, intimidating world that morning with promises of stickers and a trip to the park afterward. But in the courtroom, she felt the weight of something she didn't quite understand. The gavel's echo and the serious expressions of the adults around her made her tiny body stiffen with anticipation. Lily's mother, Claire, adjusted the straps of Lily's small backpack nervously. She had been through many courtrooms before, but each one felt heavier than the last, as if the walls themselves demanded perfection and decorum. She had hoped her daughter would remain quiet, but the little girl's curiosity was impossible to contain. Her gaze wandered, flitting from the tall, imposing judge at the bench to the nervous lawyers packing in front of the jury. And then her eyes fell on Rex. Rex had been trained for years to handle tense situations, criminal trials, high-stress scenarios, public demonstrations, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet intensity of a tiny child's stare. His ears pricked, and he shifted slightly, his nose twitching as he inhaled the faint scent of Lily. Something about her small, unguarded presence triggered a protective instinct deep within him. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but even Officer Daniels felt the change. Rex wasn't just aware of Lily. He was attuned to her, silently recognizing her curiosity and her vulnerability. The courtroom itself was a study in tension. The high ceilings amplified the small sounds, the scratching of pens, the soft coughs, the occasional shuffle of papers. Spectators sat rigidly, some with arms crossed, others gripping chairs as if they were lifeboats in a storm. The lawyers at the front spoke in measured tones, presenting arguments for custody arrangements that carried immense emotional weight. Each word seemed heavier than the last, and yet, despite the seriousness of the moment, something in the air shifted as Lily's eyes met Rex. Officer Daniels crouched slightly, just enough to ensure that Rex remained in position without breaking his composure. He could see the effect the dog was having, not on Lily, who was merely fascinated, but on the room itself. There was a subtle calming ripple, like the eye of a storm passing over tense hearts. Even the judge, who rarely allowed emotion to interfere with the proceedings, paused mid-note, noticing the unusual focus of a child on a K-9 at the side of the room. Lily tilted her head, studying Rex with the kind of curiosity only a child could summon. She was silent, not out of obedience, but because she sensed something profound in the quiet, powerful presence of the dog. Her small hands fidgeted with the straps of her backpack, yet her gaze remained fixed. Rex, in return, didn't move abruptly or bark, didn't react with excitement or agitation. Instead, he held her gaze, calm, steady, intelligent, a silent promise of safety and understanding. Claire felt her heart swell with a mix of relief and wonder. She had expected chaos, whining, and tears, but instead her daughter sat still, captivated by a silent connection she could barely comprehend. The judge glanced at Officer Daniels, whose subtle nod indicated the same unspoken acknowledgement. The K-9 was not just present, he was an anchor. The quiet dignity of Rex's posture, the gentle strength he radiated, had begun to reshape the energy of the courtroom. Around them, life continued in slow motion. Lawyers whispered to one another, clients fidgeted in their seats, and the stenographer's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Yet something had changed. A subtle pause, a quiet breath in the rhythm of tension. Even the air seemed to carry a slightly lighter weight, as if the innocence of a child, combined with the steadfast presence of a dog, could momentarily soften the rigid walls of law. Rex tilted his head ever so slightly, his eyes never leaving Lily. In that tilt, there was reassurance, intelligence, and an unspoken message. "You are safe." Lily's lips curled into the faintest smile, almost imperceptible to anyone not looking closely. That tiny gesture seemed to ripple through the room. The judge adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat, yet there was a softness in his expression that hadn't been there before. Officer Daniels let out a quiet breath, knowing this moment, though silent, was remarkable in its impact. For Lily, the world had narrowed to Rex's warm, brown eyes. All the stress and tension surrounding her faded into a blur of indistinct shapes and muted voices. She didn't yet understand custody hearings, legal arguments, or the weight of the adults' concerns. What she understood instinctively was simple. This dog, so large and strong, was steady and kind, and somehow, that steadiness made her feel braver. As the first lawyer began to speak again, the courtroom's rhythm resumed, but the undercurrent of tension had changed. Eyes that had been sharp with anticipation softened. Shoulders that had been tight began to relax ever so slightly. The presence of a child and a K-9, connected in a silent, wordless understanding, had already started to influence the space around them. Officer Daniels, watching closely, knew this would not be a fleeting moment. Rex had responded instinctively, guided by years of training but also by an unteachable empathy. And Lily, with her wide, innocent eyes, had sparked something rare, a pause in the world, a moment where the weight of human worries seemed lighter, if only for a heartbeat. The morning stretched ahead, filled with legal arguments, tense discussions, and formalities. Yet in that courtroom, amidst the pressure and expectation, a quiet, extraordinary bond had already formed. A tiny child and a mighty K-9 had met, and in their meeting the storm of tension softened, just enough to allow a glimmer of hope, warmth, and human connection to enter the room. No one could have predicted how the rest of the day would unfold, but this moment, silent, simple, profound, would be remembered by everyone present. It was a calm before the storm, yes, but it was a calm that promised extraordinary events to come. And for Lily, that calm had a name: Rex. The courtroom's heavy wooden doors closed with a soft thud, sealing the space into a bubble of concentrated attention. Every whisper faded into the background as the hearing officially commenced. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes softened by decades of experience, cleared her throat and gestured for the first attorney to begin. Claire held Lily a little tighter, feeling the girl's tiny fingers fidget in her grasp. The child's wide eyes darted nervously from one figure to another, absorbing every detail: the heavy oak bench, the polished floor reflecting the overhead lights, the slow, deliberate movements of the officers stationed near the walls. Rex, meanwhile, remained unmoving at Officer Daniels' side, though his eyes swept constantly across the room. His sharp senses picked up every subtle cue: the anxious glance of a lawyer, the nervous shuffle of a parent, the almost imperceptible tremor in Lily's small hand. He had learned to detect fear, aggression, and stress long before this day, but today was different. Today, a child's fear mingled with curiosity, and Rex instinctively understood the delicate balance. He didn't move, he didn't make a sound, yet his presence alone radiated calm, a quiet assurance that seemed to ripple through the room in subtle waves. The attorney spoke, her voice precise, measured, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Your Honor, the matter before us is one of utmost importance. Custody arrangements are not merely administrative, they shape the very future of this child." Claire's heart tightened at the words, and she instinctively drew Lily closer. Lily, sensing her mother's unease, pressed her small cheek against Claire's arm, seeking reassurance in that human connection. But it was Rex, sitting just a few feet away, who captured Lily's attention completely. From the corner of her eye, Lily had noticed the large German shepherd almost immediately upon entering the room. The dog's posture was impeccable, his coat shining under the fluorescent lights, his gaze steady and intelligent. In a room filled with tension, he seemed different. Unlike the fidgeting adults, he didn't appear nervous or impatient. His calmness was magnetic, pulling Lily's attention away from the intimidating sea of adults and papers. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she inched her tiny body forward, craning her neck to study him more closely. Rex, in turn, noticed the movement. He didn't react with excitement or alertness in the way he would to a potential threat. Instead, he acknowledged her presence with a subtle tilt of his head and a soft, attentive gaze. It was a gesture so small that most of the courtroom would have missed it if they weren't paying close attention. But for Lily, it was everything. In that moment, she felt an unspoken reassurance. This creature, so large and imposing, was calm, gentle, and aware of her. The courtroom seemed to notice the shift, even if only subconsciously. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, some with eyebrows raised, others with subtle smiles. Even the judge's stern expression softened slightly, as if sensing that this tiny human and the K9 at the side of the room had quietly altered the energy of the room. Spectators whispered, careful not to disturb the formal proceedings, yet their eyes kept flicking toward the unusual pair. There was something mesmerizing about the silent connection forming, a calm counterpoint to the otherwise tense environment. The next witness approached, a social worker tasked with providing insight into the child's emotional well-being. She spoke carefully, recounting observations of Lily in various settings. Claire noticed her daughter's posture change, stiffening slightly under the weight of so many eyes, yet her gaze kept returning to Rex. It was as if the dog had become her anchor, the one constant in a room full of strangers, legalities, and intimidating authority. Officer Daniels, ever watchful, kept a subtle hand near Rex's shoulder. He understood the power of this moment, not just for Lily but for the entire courtroom. A trained K9 could detect fear, aggression, and deception, and in doing so could influence the environment around them. Today, Rex's influence wasn't about law enforcement or detection. It was about calm, reassurance, and the quiet humanizing of a tense legal space. Even the lawyers noticed it, their arguments slightly softer, their tone measured as though the dog's presence demanded respect not just for law, but for humanity itself. Lily, emboldened by Rex's calm demeanor, began to shift in her seat, leaning forward slightly, curiosity overtaking her initial nervousness. Her small fingers fidgeted with her mother's purse strap, but her eyes never left the K9. She was silently communicating in the only way a child of her age could, through gaze and gesture, and Rex responded, not with movement but with focus and presence. He didn't approach her. He didn't move closer, respecting the unspoken boundaries of human space. Yet his steady gaze, his alert ears, and the gentle wag of his tail communicated more than words ever could. The tension in the courtroom, which had been so thick it could almost be touched, began to ease in subtle ways. Lawyers paused mid-argument to glance at the pair. Witnesses hesitated before speaking, their voices quieter, their expressions softer. Even the judge, who had years of courtroom experience, seemed momentarily affected by the quiet exchange. Officer Daniels exchanged a brief, knowing glance with the judge, a silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary power of Rex's presence. As the morning progressed, the interplay between Lily and Rex became a quiet undercurrent to the proceedings. While adults argued points of law and custody, the small child and the trained K9 maintained a silent conversation. Every tilt of the head, every flicker of the ear, every subtle wag of the tail was noticed by Lily, creating a bond that transcended words. And the courtroom, consciously or not, became part of that connection. Tension remained, but it was tempered, softened by the unusual and unexpected influence of the K9. Claire watched her daughter with a mix of relief and astonishment. She had expected fidgeting, crying, and a constant need for distraction, but instead, Lily sat almost transfixed, her eyes wide with fascination. It was a small miracle in the context of a stressful hearing. Claire's hand tightened around Lily's, squeezing just enough to communicate comfort, yet allowing her daughter to experience the silent reassurance coming from Rex. It was a balance she hadn't anticipated, yet it felt perfect in that moment. Even the court reporter, a professional who had seen countless hearings, paused briefly to glance at the pair. Fingers hovered over the keyboard, capturing dialogue but missing the subtle human story unfolding in the background. The tiny hand of a child and the patient gaze of a dog communicated something far beyond the written word, a reminder of the human heart amidst the rigidity of law and procedure. By late morning, the room had settled into an almost surreal rhythm. The lawyers presented evidence, witnesses spoke, and arguments continued. But beneath it all, there was a quiet hum of emotion shaped by innocence and loyalty. Rex remained vigilant, alert to every nuance, while Lily sat enraptured, her small world centered on this gentle giant at Officer Daniel's side. It was a bond neither words nor laws could define, yet everyone present, consciously or not, was influenced by it. The calm influence of Rex allowed Claire to breathe more easily, feeling a momentary sense of hope amid the stress. She glanced down at Lily, whose eyes sparkled with quiet curiosity, and realized that the child's fascination with the dog was more than simple interest. It was comfort, courage, and reassurance distilled into a single, silent connection. As the attorney concluded the morning's opening statement, the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The words had been heard, the points made, but an invisible force lingered in the room, softening tension, humanizing the proceedings, and reminding everyone present that beneath the law, beneath the arguments, lay something far more elemental, the quiet power of trust, empathy, and understanding. And it had all begun with a child and a dog, sharing a glance that said more than any words ever could. The courtroom had settled into a tense rhythm, with lawyers presenting arguments and witnesses recounting events. The words flowed, precise and calculated, heavy with legal significance, yet the atmosphere remained charged with unease. Claire adjusted Lily in her seat, feeling the child's small body stiffen as the hearing grew more intense. But Lily's attention was no longer on the adults or their arguments. It had shifted entirely. Her wide, curious eyes were fixed on Rex, who sat stoically at Officer Daniel's side, as if aware that something was about to unfold. Rex's ears twitched, capturing the faintest sound, the soft scrape of a chair, the click of a pen falling to the floor, the gentle inhale of the child before her next movement. He was trained to detect even the subtlest signals, and today his instincts were alert to more than just danger. They were tuned to the emotions in the room. Lily, though small and seemingly powerless in this formal, intimidating environment, carried an energy that Rex recognized. Her curiosity, innocence, and unspoken courage radiated in the air, and the dog responded without hesitation, sitting taller and more alert while keeping his composure. The moment came unexpectedly. One of the attorneys, a tall man with a precise, authoritative voice, was presenting evidence regarding custody arrangements. The room hung on every word, the tension thick and almost suffocating. Then, as if compelled by some inner curiosity, Lily leaned forward slightly, craning her tiny neck to get a better view of Rex. She had been quietly studying him throughout the morning, but now her gaze was unflinching, direct. The courtroom seemed to notice the change immediately, though none could articulate why. The judge, a woman accustomed to maintaining decorum under pressure, paused mid-note, her pen hovering over her pad. Lawyers shifted slightly, sensing a subtle shift in the energy of the room. Spectators, previously absorbed in the proceedings, turned their heads almost instinctively to observe the small girl staring at the K9. Even the jury members, trained to focus on evidence, couldn't help but notice the silent, magnetic connection forming before their eyes. Rex, sensing the weight of the moment, responded in a way only a trained K9 could. He did not bark. He did not move toward her. He simply lifted his head, ears perked, gaze unwavering. His calm, steady presence seemed to acknowledge Lily's curiosity, as if he understood her need for reassurance in a world filled with adults debating her future. The tilt of his head, the slight wag of his tail, the intensity in his eyes communicated a silent message. "I see you. You are safe." Lily's mother gasped softly, barely audible over the courtroom stillness. She had expected fidgeting, perhaps a tear or two, but not this quiet, intense moment of connection. She gripped her daughter's small hand tightly, both to anchor Lily and to witness the extraordinary exchange. Claire's mind raced. Her child, so small and vulnerable, had somehow found a source of strength in the presence of this dog, and the courtroom, almost imperceptibly, was shifting around them. The judge cleared her throat, adjusting her glasses, yet her eyes remained on the unusual pair. "Please proceed," she said, her voice carrying a softness that had not been present earlier in the morning. The words were routine, procedural, yet the tone reflected the subtle impact of Lily and Rex's silent communication. Even the attorneys, hardened by years of litigation, found themselves speaking with more measured tones, their gestures less sharp, their arguments slightly tempered. Lily, emboldened by Rex's unwavering focus, shifted slightly in her seat, leaning just enough to gesture subtly with her hand. Her tiny fingers twitched toward the dog, though she did not move forward. It was an innocent, childlike action, yet in the stillness of the courtroom, it felt monumental. Rex's ears flicked, and he responded with a barely perceptible movement, a gentle acknowledgement that bridged the gap between innocence and discipline. The courtroom held its collective breath. Spectators whispered softly among themselves, careful not to interrupt, yet unable to look away. Witnesses faltered mid-sentence, lawyers paused mid-gesture, and the stenographer's fingers hovered over the keyboard, missing a beat. For a moment, the legal proceedings, the weight of custody disputes, and the tension of adult conflicts seemed to fade into insignificance. All that mattered in that space was the quiet, extraordinary bond forming between a 3-year-old girl and a K-9 trained to respond to instinct and emotion. Officer Daniels maintained a subtle, professional posture, hands near Rex but not touching. He understood the power of this moment better than anyone in the room. Training had prepared him for tense scenarios, for situations requiring the detection of danger, fear, or deception. But no training could prepare someone for the delicate, wordless exchange between a child and a dog, an exchange that seemed to calm not just the participants, but the room itself. Rex's gaze remained locked on Lily, gentle yet firm, protective yet welcoming. His body radiated calm authority, a presence that reassured without overwhelming. In that gaze, Lily found courage. She straightened slightly, the tension in her small body easing just enough to allow a shy smile to form on her lips. It was a subtle gesture, almost imperceptible to those not paying close attention, but it carried a resonance that echoed across the room. Claire's heart swelled as she watched her daughter. She had anticipated conflict, perhaps tears and uncertainty, but instead, Lily had discovered an anchor in the form of Rex. The dog's quiet vigilance gave her the courage to remain still, to feel seen, and in some inexplicable way to assert her presence in the room. Claire's hand squeezed her daughter, both in reassurance and awe. The judge, nodding the shift in energy, allowed herself a rare, fleeting smile. Even in a courtroom built on rules and procedures, she could recognize moments that transcended law. This was one of them, a reminder that empathy, trust, and the quiet presence of loyalty could influence hearts as much as arguments ever could. Rex's subtle communication continued, a slight tilt of the head, a shift in weight, a measured wag of the tail. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and meaningful. Lily mirrored these cues in her own way. Her eyes widened, her lips curved, her fingers twitched slightly toward him. For a brief, suspended moment, they existed in their own world, entirely disconnected from the legal disputes surrounding them, yet profoundly affecting everyone who bore witness. The courtroom seemed to collectively exhale. The words of the attorney, previously sharp and commanding, now seemed softer. Witnesses spoke more gently. Lawyers gestured with tempered motions, and spectators, once tense and silent, now carried a quiet reverence. Even the air in the room felt lighter, infused with the intangible power of trust and understanding. Claire whispered softly to herself, barely audible, "Thank you, Rex," as if the dog could hear her gratitude. Whether or not he understood, the gesture seemed acknowledged in the way his eyes remained locked on Lily, patient and steady. For the tiny child, the world had narrowed to this steadfast presence, and in that narrowing she found clarity and courage beyond her years. The moment stretched, timeless and profound, before reality began to reclaim the courtroom. The attorney resumed speaking, the judge nodded, and the proceedings continued. Yet the silence, the pause in tension, and the invisible thread of connection between a child and a dog lingered in the room. Everyone present, consciously or not, felt its impact. The unexpected moment had shifted the energy of the courtroom, reminding all that even in the strictest, most formal spaces, human emotion and innocence could create a profound, lasting effect. And Lily, small and wide-eyed, remained captivated by the dog at Officer Daniel's side. She had discovered something extraordinary, a silent companion, a source of comfort, and a quiet, unwavering presence that would leave an imprint on her memory long after the hearing ended. The courtroom, for all its authority and seriousness, had been momentarily transformed by a child, a dog, and the power of an unspoken connection. The courtroom remained unusually still, almost as if time had slowed. Even the tick of the wall clock seemed to hesitate, giving space for a connection that defied logic yet was impossible to ignore. Lily, perched on her mother's lap, blinked slowly, her wide eyes never leaving Rex. The German shepherd, disciplined and alert, returned her gaze without a flicker of judgment or impatience. His ears pricked, his nose twitching slightly, and his tail moved just enough to communicate awareness. It was a subtle dance of attention, a quiet conversation that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. Officer Daniels observed silently, careful not to interfere. He had seen countless tense courtroom situations, but never one where a child's curiosity could wield such influence over the environment. Rex was trained to react to stress, aggression, and fear, yet here he was responding to pure innocence. His calm presence radiated a quiet authority, yet it was tempered by empathy, a rare combination that allowed the room to breathe, even under the pressure of legal proceedings. Claire felt her heart lighten slightly as she watched the scene unfold. Her small daughter, who had been tense at the beginning of the hearing, now sat upright, chin slightly raised, exuding confidence that came not from understanding the words being spoken, but from the unwavering presence of Rex. It was astonishing to see how a child could draw courage from the silent assurance of a dog, yet that was precisely what was happening. Around the room, spectators and court officials began to notice subtle shifts in energy. The attorneys, previously rigid and precise, adjusted their posture slightly, as if the connection between child and dog demanded a softer tone. Witnesses unconsciously softened their expressions, and even the judge, who had decades of courtroom experience, allowed a faint relaxation to creep into her features. The tension remained. It could not be entirely erased, but it was now laced with an unexpected warmth, a humanizing influence that no argument or testimony could produce. Lily's fingers twitched slightly toward Rex, an almost imperceptible gesture that nonetheless caught the attention of everyone in the room. The child's simple movement was met with a subtle response. Rex shifted his weight fractionally, his head tilting in acknowledgement, eyes steady and kind. The power of the moment was undeniable. It was as though the courtroom itself recognized the exchange and allowed itself to pause, even briefly, to honor it. The murmurs of spectators quieted further, replaced by an almost reverent silence. The stenographer's pen hovered, capturing the proceedings mechanically while missing the emotional resonance that had begun to permeate the room. Everyone seemed aware, even unconsciously, that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a quiet communion of innocence and loyalty that transcended the formality of law. Lily's mother adjusted her grip on her daughter, both in comfort and awe. Claire had expected tears, whining, and discomfort in the sterile environment of the courtroom, but instead, she was witnessing something extraordinary. Her daughter, a mere 3 years old, had formed a bond with a K-9 that brought unexpected calm and focus to a room filled with adults embroiled in tension and conflict. Claire's eyes brimmed with tears, the emotion of relief and amazement blending into a single, overwhelming sensation. The judge, aware of the unusual energy, allowed the testimony to continue, but there was a subtle softness in her tone. Even the stern expressions of the attorneys seemed to ease slightly as they spoke, as though the silent connection between Lily and Rex had infused the room with a quiet moral gravity. Every gesture, every glance, every tone of voice was now measured against the invisible presence of the child and the dog. It was remarkable how such a small, quiet moment could ripple through a space built on authority and procedure. Rex remained vigilant, not only watching Lily but also scanning the room with practiced alertness. He detected the subtle signs of human stress: shallow breathing, clenched hands, restless feet. Yet rather than reacting to these cues with aggression or alarm, he responded with calm authority, his presence diffusing tension. Each subtle movement, each gentle shift of weight, reinforced his role as a silent guardian, not just for Lily but for the emotional climate of the courtroom itself. Lily, emboldened by Rex's calm demeanor, leaned just slightly forward, a tiny gesture that signaled trust and curiosity. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. It was astonishing to see how a single child, through mere observation and quiet engagement, could command attention without uttering a word. The adults, usually the arbiters of authority and control in such a setting, found themselves swept along by a gentle, irresistible current of empathy. The mother's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Lily on her lap. She whispered softly, almost inaudibly, "Be brave, sweetie." But Lily's courage did not come from her mother. It came from the unwavering gaze of Rex. The dog's presence had become an anchor, a steadfast reminder that someone was attentive, someone was protective, and someone, in the simplest of ways, understood her entirely. The attorney continued speaking, but the words began to blend into a background hum for many in the room. The focus had shifted. Eyes wandered repeatedly to the child and the dog. Even the jury, trained to focus on evidence and testimony, found themselves stealing glances at the exchange, perhaps without fully realizing why. The tension that had gripped the courtroom in the morning had transformed into a shared experience of wonder, empathy, and quiet connection. Officer Daniels remained at his post, hands relaxed but ready, aware that Rex was performing a subtle but vital role. The dog's ability to read human emotion, combined with his disciplined restraint, was influencing the courtroom in ways no one could articulate. It was more than training, it was instinct, empathy, and a profound understanding of the human heart. And it was all being channeled toward a single, fragile little girl who was responding with trust, courage, and curiosity. The courtroom atmosphere continued to shift imperceptibly. Lawyers' tones softened, gestures became more deliberate, and even minor interruptions, papers rustling, whispers, were tempered by an almost reverent awareness. The silent connection between child and dog was contagious, reminding everyone present of something essential. Humanity, kindness, and empathy could influence even the most formal and rigid spaces. Lily's smile grew, just slightly, enough to reveal a dimpling curiosity and a spark of joy. Rex responded with a subtle nod of his head, eyes never leaving hers. For those observing, the scene was quiet but profoundly moving. In that small exchange, the formalities of law and procedure were momentarily suspended. What mattered now was connection, trust, and the silent assurance that came from a steadfast companion who understood without words. Claire felt a lump in her throat as she watched her daughter. Tears threatened, but she held them back, knowing that this moment, extraordinary in its simplicity, was unfolding exactly as it should. Her daughter, small and vulnerable in the sea of courtroom tension, had found strength in the presence of a dog whose loyalty and empathy were unmatched. It was a lesson in courage, trust, and the quiet power of connection. As the morning proceedings continued, it was clear that the energy of the courtroom had shifted irrevocably. The connection between Lily and Rex had created a subtle, yet profound ripple effect. The adults, trained to control, to argue, to impose order, found themselves responding unconsciously to the silent dialogue unfolding between child and dog. And Lily, in her small way, had found the courage to exist fully in the room, to feel seen, and to feel safe. Even the judge, glancing occasionally toward the pair, allowed a soft exhale, acknowledging the extraordinary impact of the silent connection. A child and a dog had, in the span of moments, altered the energy of a space dominated by law, procedure, and tension. And as the courtroom continued its business, the invisible influence persisted, a reminder that empathy and understanding could transcend authority and protocol. For Lily, the experience was transformative. She had discovered that courage could be drawn from unexpected places, that safety could be communicated without words, and that bonds, however silent, could resonate powerfully in the human heart. And for Rex, it was another demonstration of his extraordinary instincts, his ability to protect, to comfort, and to influence without force. The morning passed, the testimony continued, and the courtroom began to settle into its usual rhythm. Yet the memory of the silent connection lingered, like a gentle undercurrent threading through the proceedings. Everyone present, knowingly or not, carried a piece of that quiet wonder in their hearts, a reminder that even in the most serious, structured spaces, innocence and loyalty could leave an indelible mark. And Lily, still captivated by the steadfast gaze of Rex, understood something no words could convey. She was seen, she was safe. And for the first time in this formal, intimidating room, she felt a quiet but undeniable courage rising from within her. The courtroom had grown quiet in a way that defied its usual rhythm. The usual rustle of papers, the shuffle of feet, the soft murmur of spectators, all seemed muted, replaced by a hushed reverence for something unseen yet deeply felt. Lily, perched on her mother's lap, had fully captivated the room, her wide eyes locked on Rex. The German shepherd remained steady at Officer Daniel's side, muscles taut but calm, eyes unwavering, radiating a sense of quiet strength. He was the anchor in the sea of tension, and Lily instinctively recognized it. Claire felt her heart lift slightly as she watched her daughter. Lily's small shoulders, previously tense, had relaxed. Her tiny fingers, once fidgeting endlessly, now rested gently on her mother's arm, occasionally twitching as though reaching for the invisible reassurance Rex provided. Claire's grip tightened around Lily, not out of control or fear, but in solidarity and gratitude. She had expected tears, squirming, and a near-constant battle to keep her child calm. But instead, she witnessed a serenity that no one had anticipated. The attorneys, previously precise and commanding, adjusted their posture in subtle ways. One of the senior counsel, a man known for his stern demeanor, paused mid-argument, his gaze flicking to Lily and Rex. There was something in the calm power of the K9, combined with the innocent curiosity of the child, that softened the edges of the room's tension. Witnesses, too, found themselves speaking more gently, their tone less clipped, their gestures more measured. The courtroom's rhythm had shifted. A humanizing presence had entered, a force neither procedural nor legal, yet profoundly impactful. Rex, sensing Lily's deepening comfort, offered a subtle acknowledgement. His head tilted slightly, ears twitching, and his tail swished gently, a motion so measured it seemed choreographed. The dog's disciplined presence spoke volumes. There was no danger here, only quiet observation, calm and understanding. For Lily, the reassurance was palpable. The tiny child's face softened into a faint smile, the kind of smile that flickered briefly but lit up her entire expression. She leaned forward just a fraction, curiosity overcoming caution, yet still respecting the invisible boundaries that separated her from the K9. The mother whispered softly, just enough for Lily to hear, "You're okay, sweetie. You're safe." Yet it was clear that Lily's courage did not come from her mother's words alone. It came from the steadfast gaze of Rex, from the knowledge that in this room of serious adults and complicated arguments, one presence remained constant, protective and understanding. Claire's hand rested lightly on her daughter's back, feeling the subtle rise and fall of her breath, sensing the comfort radiating from the silent K9. Spectators began to notice the unusual emotional resonance as well. Even those unfamiliar with K9's or courtroom protocol seemed to understand that something extraordinary was happening. Conversations slowed, eyes drifted toward the front of the room, and even the jury, trained to focus strictly on testimony, allowed their gaze to wander repeatedly toward the small girl and the dog. It was as if the innocence of one child, combined with the loyalty and empathy of a trained canine, had created a gravitational pull strong enough to reach every corner of the room. Rex's influence extended beyond Lily. Officer Daniels noticed the subtle shifts in the courtroom, the relaxation of tense shoulders, the softening of harsh glances, the gentle intake of breath by adults who had been rigid with authority. He recognized that the dog's presence, his stillness, and unwavering attention were having a tangible effect on human behavior. It was a rare demonstration of emotional intelligence, instinct, and discipline working in perfect harmony. The K9 was not only comforting Lily, but also transmitting that serenity to the adults around him. Lily's tiny hand twitched again, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of her mother's arm. It was a gesture of curiosity, courage, and tentative connection. Rex responded in the only way he knew how, with calm vigilance. He remained still, alert but non-threatening, his gaze unbroken, his presence steady. It was a masterclass in silent communication, the dog offering reassurance without movement, control without force. The child recognized it instinctively, and in doing so, she began to relax even further, her tension melting with every silent second. Claire felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had entered the courtroom expecting a stressful ordeal, with her daughter overwhelmed by legal proceedings that were difficult for adults to navigate, let alone a 3-year-old. But now, witnessing Lily's bond with Rex, she felt something she hadn't anticipated: hope. Hope that her child could find strength in unexpected places, that courage could arise from innocence, and that comfort could be delivered without words. The courtroom, she realized, had become a space for emotional connection as well as legal proceedings. Even the judge, accustomed to observing and guiding the decorum of hundreds of hearings, felt the subtle shift. Her pen hovered over her notepad, her gaze lingering just a little longer on Lily and Rex. There was a softness in her expression, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. She allowed the proceedings to continue, but with a gentleness that had not been there before. The courtroom, usually a place of authority and rigid procedure, had been softened by the quiet power of empathy and connection. Rex's awareness extended beyond Lily's comfort. He monitored the subtle dynamics in the room. He observed the slight fidgeting of the lawyers, the restless shifting of chairs, the tense posture of parents, and the quiet anticipation of spectators. Yet instead of reacting aggressively or anxiously, he radiated calm. Each observer, consciously or unconsciously, mirrored that calm in their own way, creating a ripple effect throughout the courtroom. It was a quiet, almost magical influence, subtle yet profound and entirely unspoken. Lily, emboldened by Rex's unwavering presence, allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Her curiosity deepened, and for the first time in hours she felt a sense of agency. In a room dominated by adults with serious expressions and complex arguments, she had discovered her own source of strength. It was small and fragile but entirely real, the courage to exist fully, to observe, and to engage with the world in her own way. The attorneys continued their presentation, but their words seemed lighter, more deliberate, almost respectful of the silent influence shaping the room. Witnesses spoke with softer intonation, gestures measured and gentle, as though the weight of the courtroom's tension had been subtly shifted by an invisible hand. That hand, in reality, belonged to a dog whose training, instincts, and empathy allowed him to comfort not only the child but the entire room. Claire exhaled quietly, feeling a mixture of relief, awe, and gratitude. She whispered again, "Thank you, Rex," barely audible. Whether the dog understood the words was irrelevant. The gratitude was felt and returned in the steady calm of his gaze. Lily's tiny hand twitched once more, and Rex responded with the same gentle vigilance, a reminder that even the smallest gestures could carry profound meaning. By late morning, the courtroom had settled into a rhythm unlike any hearing Claire had ever experienced. Tension remained. This was still a custody dispute, and emotions ran deep, but it was tempered by the quiet, persistent influence of Rex. The dog's presence had created a space where even adults could soften, where courage and comfort could coexist with procedure and authority. Lily's comfort, in turn, radiated outward, touching everyone in subtle, imperceptible ways. As the morning proceedings drew on, it became clear that something extraordinary had occurred. A 3-year-old girl had found solace and courage in the presence of a K9. The courtroom, previously a place of tension, discipline, and authority, had been transformed into a space where empathy, connection, and silent understanding could coexist with the law. It was a moment of grace, unplanned and extraordinary, yet profoundly impactful. And Lily, small and wide-eyed, remained at the center of it all, drawing strength from the steady gaze of Rex. In that quiet bond, she discovered that even in the most intimidating environments, comfort could exist, courage could emerge, and human hearts, guided by the empathy of an animal, could be moved in ways words could never achieve. The courtroom had settled into a strange, almost reverential rhythm. The voices of attorneys, once clipped and commanding, now carried a softer timbre. The usual scratching of pens, shuffling of papers, and subtle coughs seemed muted, as if the room itself had paused to observe the silent bond unfolding at its edge. All attention, whether consciously or unconsciously, gravitated toward Lily and Rex. Lily, perched securely on her mother's lap, sat straighter than she had at any point that morning. Her wide eyes sparkled with cautious curiosity, following every subtle movement of the K9. Rex, his posture perfect and disciplined, responded with minimal but meaningful gestures, a tilt of his head, a shift in his stance, a gentle wag of his tail. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and deeply communicative. It was as though the dog and child were conducting an unspoken dialogue, and everyone in the courtroom was eavesdropping, even without realizing it. Officer Daniels, standing at his usual post, observed with quiet pride. He had trained Rex for decades, mastering situations of high tension, public events, and even dangerous law enforcement operations. Yet none of that preparation could match the profound impact of the silent exchange currently taking place. The K9 was not detecting threats or aggression. He was sensing fear, vulnerability, and curiosity, and responding with unwavering calm. It was a rare skill, a blend of instinct, intelligence, and empathy that affected everyone within the courtroom's walls. Even the judge, a woman known for her strict adherence to procedure, softened ever so slightly. She adjusted her glasses and allowed herself a subtle exhale, her gaze lingering on the duo. The usually rigid courtroom, a place governed by authority, rules, and meticulous procedure, had become a space of quiet wonder. The judge's pen hovered over her notepad, the words she was writing delayed by the extraordinary scene before her. Witnesses, when called to the stand, found themselves subtly influenced by the atmosphere. One mother, testifying about the child's daily routine, paused mid-sentence, her voice softer, her gestures less rigid. She glanced briefly at Lily and Rex, her eyes reflecting a mixture of awe and understanding. The power of the K9's presence had shifted her confidence and her tone, subtly reshaping the testimony without any overt interference. The attorneys themselves were not immune. One of the senior counsel, a man known for his exacting standards and sharp command of the courtroom, momentarily faltered mid-sentence. He paused, glancing toward the front row where Lily's small form mirrored Rex's movements in tentative fascination. The lawyer's jaw tightened, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was uncharacteristic, yet unavoidable. The presence of the child and the dog commanded a degree of respect that transcended professional decorum. Spectators leaned slightly forward in their seats, their whispered conversations halting mid-thought. Cameras of smartphones, though prohibited, were absent only because everyone was too captivated to think of documenting the moment. There was an almost palpable tension interlaced with warmth, the sort that arises when innocence and empathy unexpectedly collide with formality and procedure. The courtroom, for the first time that morning, felt alive with emotion beyond legal obligations. Lily, emboldened by the calm of Rex, began to shift subtly in her seat. Her tiny hands moved to adjust the strap of her backpack, a simple gesture, yet in that moment it conveyed courage and agency. She wasn't merely a passive observer. She was interacting silently with the dog, testing the limits of the connection and discovering a personal sense of strength. Rex responded in kind, maintaining his steady gaze, acknowledging her presence without encroaching upon her space. Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. Her daughter, so small and seemingly fragile, had found her own anchor in a dog trained for protection, loyalty, and discipline. The emotional weight of the morning, the fear of custody disputes, the strain of legal arguments, the anxiety of the unknown, was softened, if only slightly, by the silent reassurance emanating from Rex. Claire realized that her daughter's courage was being nurtured not by words or promises, but by the quiet understanding of a loyal companion. The court stenographer, typing methodically, faltered for just a moment. Her fingers hovered over the keys, missing a stroke. She looked up, catching the extraordinary scene, and found herself momentarily lost in the child's wonder and the dog's unwavering presence. The mechanical act of recording testimony became secondary to the human story unfolding before her. Even the jury members, trained to remain objective and focused on facts, could not ignore the emotional current in the room. Their glances, subtle yet frequent, shifted toward Lily and Rex. A juror, a middle-aged man with a habitual furrowed brow, leaned slightly forward, his expression softening. Another juror's hand unconsciously reached to adjust their seat, an almost imperceptible gesture reflecting the unconscious impact of the silent bond. The courtroom's collective energy was being reshaped in ways no one could have anticipated. Rex's vigilance never wavered. Though he remained at rest, his eyes swept the room in subtle arcs, monitoring body language, tone, and subtle signs of emotional stress. The dog's presence was a masterclass in silent leadership, commanding attention not through force or volume, but through discipline, empathy, and unwavering focus. Adults, conditioned to authority and hierarchy, unconsciously mirrored that calm, drawn into the K9's orbit of quiet power. Lily, sensing the effect, allowed herself another subtle smile. The fear and uncertainty that had gripped her earlier in the morning had softened, replaced by a new confidence born from trust and observation. In that moment, she began to exist in the courtroom on her own terms, a tiny human asserting presence without words, relying entirely on silent communication with her canine guardian. The judge cleared her throat, a subtle acknowledgement that the proceedings must continue, but the tone was lighter, less rigid. "Please continue," she said, her eyes flicking again toward Lily and Rex. The words were procedural, but the warmth in her voice suggested an unspoken recognition of the extraordinary impact unfolding before her. The mother squeezed her daughter's hand lightly, sensing the invisible but undeniable shift in the room. Claire whispered softly, "You're doing wonderfully, sweetie." Lily's tiny hand twitched slightly, almost a reflexive response to the encouragement, yet it was evident that her courage stemmed primarily from Rex's steady presence rather than her mother's words. Attorneys resumed their arguments, but there was a subtle gentleness in their gestures, a measure of care in their tones that had not existed before. Even when discussing tense or contentious points, the humanizing influence of the child and the dog softened the delivery. Witnesses, too, mirrored this change, their voices carrying warmth alongside their testimony, gestures gentle and deliberate. The spectators, though still silent, felt the emotional resonance, a shared awareness of the quiet miracle occurring before their eyes. The child and dog, in their wordless exchange, had created a ripple of calm and understanding that extended far beyond themselves, touching every corner of the room. There was a profound lesson in this simple, silent interaction. Courage, comfort, and empathy could influence even the most structured and tense of environments. Rex shifted slightly, adjusting his weight while keeping his gaze locked on Lily. The dog's subtle movements communicated reassurance, a reminder that she was safe, seen, and supported. Lily responded by leaning forward ever so slightly, her eyes reflecting trust and curiosity. It was a dialogue without words, yet powerful enough to reshape the emotional landscape of the courtroom. By late morning, the courtroom had been transformed. The tension of custody arguments remained, but it was softened by the presence of the K-9 and the courage of a small child. Witnesses spoke more gently, lawyers moderated their gestures, the judge allowed a subtle warmth in her tone, and spectators observed with quiet awe. Lily's bravery and Rex's steady presence had created a ripple effect that extended to everyone present, proving that even in a place defined by law and authority, empathy and connection could wield extraordinary power. And Lily, small yet resilient, continued to find strength in the unwavering gaze of Rex. In that silent bond, she had discovered courage, comfort, and a quiet understanding that would stay with her long after the courtroom doors closed. The room, now softened and humanized, was testament to the quiet, transformative power of innocence and loyalty. By early afternoon, the courtroom had taken on an unusual energy, tense yet softened, formal yet quietly humanized. The morning's legal arguments had progressed, but the attention of nearly everyone present had shifted subtly, inevitably, toward the small girl and the K-9. Lily's wide eyes, still fixed on Rex, held a depth of trust and curiosity that seemed almost improbable for her age. The dog, disciplined and calm, reciprocated with unwavering focus, a silent promise that she was safe, understood, and protected. The judge, a woman whose years on the bench had taught her to anticipate the unpredictable, now allowed herself a moment to observe. Her stern features softened as she glanced toward Lily. Here, in this formal, rigid space of law and procedure, a rare moment of genuine humanity was unfolding. The child and the dog communicated without words, yet their silent interaction resonated powerfully. The judge exhaled slowly, acknowledging internally that the law, while vital, existed alongside the delicate, often unseen forces of trust, loyalty, and courage. Witnesses approached the stand with slightly less tension, their statements now imbued with gentle inflections, as if the invisible presence of Rex encouraged empathy. One social worker, called to testify about Lily's emotional needs, spoke with a warmth and depth that went beyond her prepared words. She recounted moments of play, small expressions of fear, and acts of quiet bravery, glancing occasionally toward the child and the dog. In that glance, the courtroom sensed the bond, understood it, and responded collectively. Lily's mother, Claire, felt her chest tighten with a mixture of awe and relief. Her daughter, once anxious and timid in the overwhelming presence of legal authority, now seemed to possess a quiet inner strength. Lily's tiny fingers twitched occasionally toward Rex, a gesture of curiosity and connection, and the dog responded with minimal but deliberate acknowledgement, a tilt of his head, a measured blink, a slight wag of his tail. Claire realized that this unspoken exchange was transforming not only her daughter's confidence, but the entire emotional tenor of the room. The attorneys, initially focused solely on legal strategy, began to mirror the emotional tone set by the child and the dog. One of the senior counsel, usually rigid and commanding, adjusted his posture, allowing a subtle softness into his voice as he continued presenting evidence. Gestures that had once been sharp and pointed now carried precision tempered with care. Even the opposing counsel, a woman known for her formidable courtroom presence, appeared momentarily disarmed by the palpable empathy permeating the space. The spectators, seated in neat rows along the gallery, remained quiet but attentive. Phones and cameras, usually poised for capturing visual proof of proceedings, remained untouched. Everyone present sensed that this moment transcended mere documentation. The courtroom had become a living space of connection, with Lily and Rex at its center. The quiet energy radiated outward, creating a shared awareness that no one could ignore. Rex, sensing the cumulative tension and its gradual release, shifted slightly, adjusting his weight without disturbing his posture. His eyes never left Lily. There was a precision to his calm that went beyond obedience, an instinctive understanding of emotional dynamics that allowed him to influence not only the child's comfort but also the environment around him. Adults responded unconsciously, shoulders relaxing, faces softening, and voices carrying a gentle undertone of empathy. Lily, emboldened further by the K9's unwavering presence, leaned slightly forward on her mother's lap. She watched intently, her tiny form radiating curiosity and courage. The child's trust in Rex allowed her to exist fully in a space that had initially felt intimidating and overwhelming. For the first time that day, she seemed genuinely engaged, unburdened by fear or uncertainty. The social worker continued her testimony, speaking about Lily's daily routines, interactions, and emotional resilience. Her observations, though factual, were softened by the intangible influence of the silent connection at the room's forefront. Each statement seemed to carry more weight, not simply because of the words, but because of the context, the presence of empathy, loyalty, and trust visibly affecting those around it. Even the jury, trained to remain impartial and objective, felt the subtle yet undeniable impact. Glances were exchanged among members, all unconsciously drawn toward the silent conversation unfolding between child and dog. The usual detachment required for legal proceedings had been tempered by a shared recognition. Something extraordinary was occurring in that courtroom. Human emotion, in its purest and most instinctive form, had taken root amid the formality of law. Claire's hand rested lightly on Lily's shoulder, yet she did not attempt to intervene in the child's focus. She understood that the courage Lily displayed was self-generated, cultivated in the silent reassurance offered by Rex. It was a quiet yet profound moment of empowerment for a child navigating a complex and intimidating world. Claire's eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of gratitude, wonder, and hope. The judge, observing the room, allowed a rare, subtle smile to form. She had presided over countless hearings, yet few had carried the emotional resonance of the one unfolding now. The power of a child's innocence, combined with the loyalty and empathy of a K9, had created a palpable transformation. Authority and law were still present, yet they were complemented by a humanizing force that none could deny. Rex's subtle movements continued to reinforce the emotional current. A gentle lift of the head, a barely perceptible blink, and a small shift of his stance were all interpreted by Lily as silent encouragement. The child's confidence, previously tentative, now radiated in subtle ways. Her fingers twitched with curiosity, her posture straightened, and her gaze met Rex with unspoken understanding. It was a dialogue without words, yet the emotional clarity was unmistakable. Attorneys continued their arguments, but their delivery was tempered by the atmosphere. Sharpness was replaced with careful consideration, tension with empathy. Witnesses spoke with warmth, and even skeptical observers found themselves softened by the profound yet quiet demonstration of trust and loyalty. The courtroom, for the first time that day, felt cohesive rather than fractured. All attention, consciously or unconsciously, had been drawn toward the human and canine connection at the room's center. The mother whispered again, her voice barely audible, "You're amazing, sweetie." Lily responded not with words but with a slight tilt of her head, acknowledging both the comfort of her mother and the reassurance of Rex. The K9's steady presence amplified that comfort, ensuring the child's courage would not falter even in the most intimidating of environments. Spectators, jurors, and courtroom staff alike began to absorb the atmosphere of quiet strength and empathy. The air, previously thick with tension, seemed lighter, infused with warmth that originated from an unlikely source, a small child and a loyal dog. The collective attention shifted imperceptibly, recognizing the extraordinary impact of presence, observation, and silent communication. As the afternoon wore on, it became increasingly clear that the courtroom had been irrevocably changed. Lily, small yet courageous, had found her own source of strength in the calm vigilance of Rex. The adults, whether attorneys, witnesses, jurors, or spectators, had been subtly drawn into the bond, their actions, expressions, and voices tempered by the extraordinary influence of empathy and loyalty. And in that silent exchange, head tilts, gentle glances, and careful observation, the courtroom learned a lesson that transcended legal arguments. Courage, trust, and human connection could manifest in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes a single unspoken bond could shift the hearts of all who witnessed it. Rex remained at attention, yet relaxed, a perfect balance of discipline and empathy. Lily's small frame leaned slightly toward him, eyes bright, fingers twitching in quiet acknowledgement. In that moment, the courtroom was no longer just a place of authority and procedure. It had become a sanctuary of understanding, a space where a child's courage, nurtured by loyalty and trust, could inspire an entire room. For Claire, witnessing her daughter's transformation was almost overwhelming. Tears threatened again, but she held them back, choosing instead to savor the moment. Her daughter, small but resilient, had discovered strength beyond her years, and Rex, through his calm, disciplined presence, had provided the bridge to that courage. The judge allowed a subtle nod, signaling the continuation of proceedings, but the room had been altered forever. The silent power of trust and empathy had left its mark, a reminder that even in the structured world of law, humanity could not be contained. And Lily, focused on Rex, understood something profound. Courage could be quiet, strength could be silent, and bonds built on trust and understanding could influence more than words ever could. As the afternoon sun filtered through the tall courtroom windows, the proceedings began to draw toward a close. Though legal arguments and testimony had filled hours of meticulous scrutiny, the true story that had captured the room was not found in the documents, evidence, or verbal exchanges. It was found in the quiet, steadfast connection between a 3-year-old girl and a K-9, whose loyalty and empathy radiated without a single word. The judge, having presided over many cases in her career, paused for a moment before giving her final remarks. Her voice, soft yet authoritative, carried an unexpected warmth. "This courtroom has witnessed more than just legal arguments today," she said, her gaze sweeping across attorneys, jury, spectators, and finally Lily and Rex. "It has witnessed the quiet power of trust, the courage of a child, and the profound influence of loyalty and empathy." Claire's heart leapt. She glanced down at Lily, who was sitting straighter than ever, her small hands clasped together as if trying to contain the flood of emotion she could not yet fully name. Lily's eyes met Rex's once more. The dog, disciplined and calm, gave a slight nod with his head, a gesture so subtle yet profound that it seemed to communicate both pride and reassurance. In that glance, Lily felt understood and safe in a way she had not before. Rex's presence, though quiet, had shifted the courtroom's energy throughout the day. Attorneys softened their tones and tempered gestures. Witnesses spoke with warmth and care. Jurors, trained for impartiality, found their hearts subtly touched. Even the spectators, many of whom had entered expecting tension and procedural rigor, felt the weight of empathy that had quietly transformed the space. In this room dominated by authority, schedules, and rules, humanity had spoken louder than any legal argument. The judge continued, her gaze still lingering on the pair at the front. "It is clear to the court that Lily possesses remarkable resilience for her age, and while legal statutes guide our decisions, it is equally important to recognize the emotional well-being of children in our care." Her tone was gentle, measured, yet carried a weight that signaled the profound significance of what had unfolded. The presence of a loyal companion, a source of comfort and trust, has demonstrated the importance of understanding a child's emotional needs alongside procedural law. Lily's mother felt tears prick her eyes. Claire had spent years worrying about how her daughter would navigate life's challenges, and custody proceedings had always seemed like insurmountable hurdles. But now, seeing the calm strength radiating from her child, drawn from her bond with Rex, Claire felt a hope she had not dared to imagine earlier in the day. Her tiny daughter, who had entered the courtroom timid and anxious, now radiated courage, curiosity, and a quiet authority born of trust. Rex, ever vigilant, maintained his position beside Officer Daniels. His eyes never left Lily as he subtly shifted his stance, the smallest movements communicating reassurance. The K-9's calm demeanor had provided Lily with the courage to remain centered amid chaos, and the courtroom had unconsciously mirrored his presence. It was a testament to the silent language of loyalty and empathy, a reminder that sometimes the strongest influence comes not from words, but from steadfast attention and presence. Witnesses were dismissed one by one, leaving behind soft echoes of testimony that were overshadowed by the larger narrative, the story of courage, trust, and connection. Attorneys gathered their materials, their expressions a mix of professionalism and quiet reflection. The jurors, too, appeared contemplative, their previous focus on technical details tempered by the emotional resonance of what they had observed. Everyone in the room, in some measure, carried the imprint of Lily and Rex's bond. Finally, the judge issued her concluding statements, turning directly to the child at the center of the day's extraordinary events. "Lily," she said softly, "you have shown remarkable courage. Your strength and curiosity remind us all that even in the most serious circumstances, the quiet presence of understanding and loyalty can guide us." The courtroom was silent, the weight of the words settling like sunlight through the windows. Lily's eyes glimmered as she absorbed the recognition, her small shoulders lifting with a sense of pride and confidence. Claire exhaled quietly, her heart swelling with relief and gratitude. She leaned forward slightly, whispering to her daughter, "You've done wonderfully, sweetheart." Lily's response was a shy but genuine smile, her tiny hands twitching once toward Rex. The dog's subtle nod and blink of acknowledgement reinforced the message. She had been seen, understood, and supported throughout the day. Officer Daniels, standing with his usual disciplined posture, allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The training, years of preparation, and countless hours with K-9s had culminated in this extraordinary display of silent empathy. Rex had not only fulfilled his role as a protective companion, but had demonstrated an almost human ability to sense fear, vulnerability, and courage, amplifying the best in the child and even the adults around her. As the courtroom began to empty, Claire carefully lifted Lily from her seat. The small child clung briefly to her mother, then turned to Rex with a gentle, almost reverent glance. The dog's response was perfect, a tilt of the head, a calm blink, a soft wag of the tail, communicating the same silent message he had conveyed all day. "You are safe, you are brave, and you are not alone." The spectators, many of whom had been moved quietly throughout the day, lingered just a moment longer, watching the small scene unfold. Even strangers recognized the extraordinary nature of the connection. A child, small and tender, drawing strength and courage from the steady presence of a loyal canine companion. It was a moment that would linger in memory far longer than any legal argument or formal procedure. Outside the courtroom, the sun was beginning to dip lower, casting warm golden light across the building's facade. Claire held Lily's hand tightly as they walked toward the exit, her heart full of gratitude for the extraordinary support that had carried them through the day. Rex followed obediently, Officer Daniels at his side, the K-9's steady gait a reminder of the calm vigilance that had defined the morning. For Lily, the world felt different now. She had discovered a quiet strength within herself, nurtured by the unwavering loyalty of her companion. The courtroom, once a place of fear and intimidation, had become a space where courage, empathy, and trust were acknowledged, even celebrated. And in that transformation, she had found something lasting, the confidence to navigate challenges with resilience and the knowledge that she was never truly alone. Claire knelt briefly to meet her daughter's eyes. "You were amazing today," she said softly, voice thick with emotion. Lily beamed, a shy but genuine smile lighting her face. The child's confidence, previously fragile and uncertain, now radiated quietly, a reflection of both her own courage and the guidance of her steadfast friend. Officer Daniels opened the car door and Rex walked calmly alongside Lily, his presence still a source of silent reassurance. The day had been extraordinary, filled with legal proceedings and tension, yet it was the quiet, wordless bond between child and dog that had left the deepest impression. Claire realized that the lessons of the day extended far beyond custody decisions. They were lessons of trust, courage, empathy, and the transformative power of connection. As they drove away from the courthouse, Lily glanced back at Rex, her tiny hand waving in a gesture of gratitude and recognition. The K9 returned the gesture in his own way, a steady, calm presence that required no words, no applause, and no recognition beyond the quiet understanding they shared. It was enough. It had always been enough. And though the courtroom would soon return to its routine of legal procedures, schedules, and formalities, the impact of that extraordinary day would linger in the hearts of everyone present. Lily had learned courage, the courtroom had witnessed empathy in action, and Rex had demonstrated that the quiet presence of loyalty and understanding could reshape even the most structured, intimidating environments. In the years to come, Claire would recount the day not for its legal outcomes, but for the lessons it imparted. Lily would grow, carrying the memory of courage and trust nurtured by a K9 who saw her fear and answered with calm strength. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the courthouse and the hearts of those who observed, the story of a small child, a loyal dog, and the silent bond that transformed a room would be remembered long after the final gavel had fallen. The sun set, casting its golden light across the city. Lily held her mother's hand tightly, her heart full, her spirit strong, and her gaze occasionally drifting toward Rex. The courtroom's silence had been replaced by a quiet reverence in life itself, and in that space, courage, trust, and empathy had won, not through words, but through the steadfast bond between a child and her K9 companion.